Have you ever made a simple mistake and then realized it might cost you everything you've spent a lifetime building? Linda Carter was 61 years old. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful, just a quiet woman who had done her job faithfully for over 20 years. She followed the rules. She trusted the system. So how did her name end up at the center of a data breach worth millions of dollars? Why did every record, every login, every security code say it was her? And if Linda didn't do it, then why did no one believe her? The Monday sky over Columbus, Ohio, was a dull gray, with a steady drizzle softening the edges of the office buildings. It was the kind of quiet morning that made everything feel slower than usual, as if the day itself hadn't fully decided to begin. Linda Carter had built her life on one simple belief: if you were careful enough, things wouldn't fall apart. At 61, she carried that belief the way others carried habits, quietly, consistently, without ever needing to say it out loud. She was a woman people rarely noticed but often relied on. Her short, light brown hair, touched with thin strands of gray, was always neatly tucked behind her ears. Her face was soft, lined gently by time rather than hardship, though lately those lines seemed deeper, especially around her eyes. She dressed simply, usually a cardigan, pressed blouse, practical shoes, and moved with the cautious precision of someone who had spent years making sure she didn't make mistakes. For more than 20 years, Linda had worked as a contracts administrator at Wexler Freight Systems, a mid-sized logistics company handling shipments across several states. Her job wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. She managed client contracts, vendor agreements, pricing documents, and shipping schedules. She kept records accurate, files organized, and details from slipping through unnoticed. She wasn't the person who made decisions, but she was the person who made sure decisions held together. People trusted her without thinking about it, and Linda liked it that way. Her desk was tidy, almost carefully so. A stack of labeled folders sat to her left, a ceramic mug filled with pens to her right, and a yellow notepad covered in small, neat handwriting. Hidden just beneath it was a small spiral notebook she never showed anyone. Inside were step-by-step instructions she had written for herself: how to log into new systems, how to reset passwords, how to handle two-factor authentication. It was her way of keeping up. Because the truth was, the company had changed. Over the past few years, everything had become faster, more digital, more complicated. Systems updated without warning. Processes that once took paper and signatures were now hidden behind layers of logins and verification codes. Younger employees adapted easily. Linda did not. She learned slowly, carefully, often repeating steps until they felt safe. She asked fewer questions than she needed to, because every question carried a quiet fear that someone might finally say what she already suspected: that she didn't belong anymore. That morning, she had just opened a document when a message appeared on her screen. "Please report to Conference Room B immediately." Linda stared at it longer than necessary. No greeting, no explanation. A small, uneasy feeling settled in her chest. She checked the sender, then checked again, though she wasn't sure what she was looking for. Everything seemed normal. Still, something didn't feel right. She stood slowly, smoothing her cardigan, and walked out into the hallway. The office sounded the same as always, phones ringing, keyboards tapping, but something about it felt distant. As she passed the break room, two younger employees lowered their voices mid-conversation. One of them glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Linda told herself it meant nothing, but the unease stayed. Conference Room B was already lit when she arrived. The overhead lights were brighter than usual, almost harsh. Linda paused at the doorway. Kevin Brooks sat at the head of the table. Kevin was the kind of man people described as impressive before they described him as kind. At 35, he had a sharp, polished appearance, dark hair perfectly styled, clean-shaven jaw, tailored suit that fit just a little too well to be accidental. He carried himself with confidence, the kind that came from always being one step ahead. His voice was calm, controlled, and always professional, but there was a distance in it, something that kept people from getting too close. As head of the company's digital transformation initiative, Kevin was respected, even admired. He spoke fluently about efficiency, optimization, and the future. And while he never said it directly, there was always an implication beneath his words, that anything old needed to be replaced, including people. To his right sat Melissa Grant from HR, a woman in her 50s with carefully styled blonde hair and a composed, unreadable expression. She had a gentle voice, but there was something rehearsed about it, as if she had practiced saying difficult things without letting them sound emotional. Beside her was David Chen from IT, thin, quiet, and focused, with tired eyes behind rectangular glasses. He looked like a man who trusted systems more than people. On the far end sat a young legal associate, already typing. Linda's eyes moved to the screen. Her name was at the top, highlighted. Her stomach tightened. "Linda," Kevin said calmly, "please have a seat." She did. David clicked the screen and rows of data appeared. "Based on current system logs," he began, "it appears your credentials were used late Saturday night to access and download restricted internal data." Linda blinked. "My credentials?" David nodded. "Client contracts, pricing data, and shipment schedules tied to multiple major accounts." The words felt heavy, but distant. "That's not possible," she said. "I wasn't here." Kevin leaned slightly forward. "The system shows a successful login using your email, your password, and your authentication code." Something inside her shifted. Then the memory came back. The email. It had looked real. Company logo. Familiar wording. It said her account needed to be updated as part of a new security protocol. She remembered hesitating. And then Kevin walking past her desk that afternoon. "Better do it now," he had said casually. "They're cleaning up old access before the next update." That had been enough. She clicked. She logged in. Then the phone call came. A calm voice, patient, professional. It told her the system hadn't synced properly and asked her to confirm the verification code sent to her phone. She gave it, because she didn't want to get it wrong, because she didn't want to slow things down. "I got an email," Linda said quickly. "And then a call, from IT, I thought. They said I needed to confirm the code." Kevin exhaled softly. "This is exactly why we've been emphasizing updated security protocols," he said. The tone wasn't harsh. It was worse. It was final. Melissa leaned forward slightly. "Employees are instructed not to share authentication codes under any circumstances." Linda felt her face burn. "I didn't know," she said. "It looked real." David glanced at the screen. "There's no indication of external breach before credential access." The sentence landed heavily. Linda looked around. No one met her eyes, not one person. For the first time, doubt crept in, not about what had happened, but about herself. Maybe she had missed something. Maybe she had always been just a step behind. Kevin spoke again, calm and controlled. "We're not suggesting intent, but the breach originated through your account. That makes you the focus of this investigation." Focus, not victim. Linda's hands trembled in her lap. She wasn't afraid of losing her job, not yet. She was afraid of something worse, being seen as someone who didn't understand the world anymore. Melissa slid a folder toward her. "You are being placed on administrative suspension effective immediately." The words echoed. After 22 years. Kevin stood. "Your access badge has been deactivated as part of standard security protocol. Security will escort you out." Escort. Linda stood slowly. The hallway outside felt louder now. Or maybe she just noticed it more. People looked, then looked away. At her desk, she reached for her notebook, the small one hidden beneath everything else. For a moment, she wanted to explain it. That she had written everything down, that she had tried. But no one asked. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. Linda stood beside her car, her cardigan damp, her hands still shaking. 22 years. Gone in less than an hour. She got into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had always been too slow, too careful, too outdated. But something didn't sit right. Not completely. She had followed instructions. She had done exactly what she was told. And if that was true, then why did it feel like someone had been waiting for her to make that mistake? Linda Carter had never been the kind of woman who filled a room with her voice, but she had always been the kind people quietly relied on when things needed to be right. She arrived earlier than most, left later than she should, and carried responsibilities that were rarely acknowledged but always necessary. After her husband died 12 years ago, she had anchored herself to routine, to work, to anything that felt stable enough to hold her together. Raising her daughter Amy on a single income had not been easy, but Linda had never complained. She believed that consistency, showing up, doing things properly, staying out of trouble, was enough to build a life that would not collapse. For a long time, it had been. But stability, Linda was beginning to realize, was not something the modern world respected. By the time she reached home that evening, the rain had followed her all the way back, a thin gray curtain that blurred the streets into something unfamiliar. Her house was small, modest, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where most people kept to themselves. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it, neat, quiet, untouched. The silence pressed in on her the moment she closed the door. Her beige cardigan was still damp when she hung it carefully by the entrance. On the chair near the kitchen table rested her old navy work blazer, the one she wore on important days. She stared at it for a long moment before looking away. The lunch she had packed that morning still sat unopened in her bag. She took it out slowly, placing it on the table as if it might mean something if she handled it gently enough. For the first time, the weight of the day settled fully on her. Not just what had happened, but how quickly it had happened. Linda lowered herself into the chair and rested her hands in her lap. They were still trembling, though she tried to keep them still. She replayed the meeting again and again, each sentence sharper than before, each look more distant than she had noticed at the time. No one had raised their voice, no one had accused her outright, and yet she had never felt more judged in her life. It wasn't anger that stayed with her, it was the silence, the way people had avoided her eyes, the way the room had already decided what she was before she had finished speaking. Later that evening, her phone rang. "Amy," Linda said softly when she answered. Amy Carter was 35, her daughter's voice steady but edged with concern. She had inherited her father's darker hair and sharper features, but her eyes carried the same quiet warmth as Linda's. She worked in retail management in another state, practical and resilient, someone who had learned early how to handle pressure without showing it. "Mom, what happened?" Amy asked. "You sounded different earlier." Linda hesitated. She wanted to explain everything clearly, calmly, in a way that made sense, but the words refused to organize themselves. "I think I made a mistake," she said finally. There was a pause on the other end. "What kind of mistake?" Linda swallowed. "Something with the system. They said my account was used to access files, important ones." Amy didn't respond right away. "Did you do it?" she asked carefully. The question was gentle, but it cut deeper than anything Kevin had said. "No," Linda said, her voice barely holding together. "I mean, I don't think so." Another pause. "You don't think so?" Linda closed her eyes. "I followed instructions," she said. "There was an email and a call. I thought it was IT." Amy exhaled slowly. "Mom, you know they always say not to." "I know," Linda interrupted quietly. "I know that now." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. "Maybe you should talk to a lawyer," Amy said eventually. "Or at least, be careful what you say to them." Linda nodded, even though Amy couldn't see her. I don't understand how it happened," she said. And that was the truth that frightened her most. Not knowing. The next morning, Linda woke up at the same time she always did. 6:15 a.m. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then the memory returned, sharp and immediate. She sat up slowly. There was nowhere she needed to go. The realization left a hollow space inside her. She still got dressed anyway, out of habit, out of refusal. The days that followed blurred together in a way Linda had never experienced before. Emails from HR arrived, carefully worded, outlining procedures, reminding her not to access company systems, informing her that the investigation was ongoing. Each message felt distant, formal, as if written about someone else. But the world outside those emails was less controlled. By the third day, the rumors had begun to spread. Linda noticed it first at the grocery store. A woman she recognized from accounting, Janet Miller, a thin, sharp-featured woman in her late 40s with tightly curled hair and a habit of speaking too quickly, froze when she saw Linda near the produce section. Janet offered a tight, polite smile, then turned her cart away almost immediately. Linda pretended not to notice, but she did. Later, at the pharmacy, she overheard two voices behind her. "Heard it was internal," one whispered. "Of course it was," the other replied. "Those systems don't just break themselves." Linda didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The words followed her out of the store. At home, she found herself avoiding mirrors. Not because she didn't want to see her reflection, but because she wasn't sure she recognized it anymore. Was she careless? Had she always been? The questions came quietly at first, then louder. She thought about every time she had hesitated in front of a screen, every time she had asked someone younger for help, every time she had written instructions down instead of remembering them. Maybe they had all seen it before she had. Maybe this wasn't sudden at all. Maybe it had been building. That thought stayed with her longer than anything else. On the fifth day, another email arrived, a request to attend a formal follow-up interview. Linda read it 3 times before closing the laptop. Her chest tightened again. This time, it wasn't confusion. It was something heavier, a slow, creeping realization. She was no longer just a person who might have made a mistake. She was becoming a story, a caution, an example. And once people became examples, it was very hard to become anything else again. That night, Linda sat at the kitchen table with her small spiral notebook open in front of her. Page after page of careful handwriting, login steps, security reminders, verification codes, proof that she had tried. Her fingers traced the ink slowly. "I did everything right," she whispered to herself. But even as she said it, the doubt remained. Because if she had done everything right, then why was everything falling apart? And somewhere beneath that question, quieter but sharper, another one began to form. If she had really just made a mistake, why did it feel like she had been the easiest person to blame? The first interview began at 9 a.m., but Linda Carter had arrived nearly 40 minutes early, sitting alone in the same building that had quietly removed her just days before. The lobby looked unchanged. Polished floors, muted corporate decor, the faint hum of early office activity. But something in the air had shifted, or perhaps it was simply her place within it that had. A temporary badge hung from her neck now, plain and unfamiliar, a small detail that made her feel like a visitor in a place where she had once known every hallway by memory. The security officer at the desk nodded at her without recognition. That, more than anything else, unsettled her. Inside conference room C, smaller, colder than the previous one, 2 people were already waiting. David Chen sat nearest to the screen, his laptop open, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard as if prepared to summon evidence at any moment. Beside him was a man Linda had not seen before. "Linda," David said with a polite nod. "This is Robert Hayes from External Compliance." Robert Hayes was in his late 50s, tall with a slightly stooped posture that suggested years spent leaning over documents rather than people. His hair was thinning and steel gray, combed carefully to one side. He had a square, lined face and a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard, the kind that gave him an air of authority without warmth. His eyes were steady, observant, but detached, as if he had learned long ago to separate facts from the people those facts affected. He wore a dark charcoal suit that looked expensive but deliberately unremarkable, the uniform of someone who preferred not to be remembered, only respected. "Miss Carter," Robert said, his voice even and measured. "We're here to clarify the sequence of events surrounding the unauthorized data access." Clarify. The word sounded almost gentle, but Linda understood now that gentleness did not mean kindness. She sat down, folding her hands together to stop them from trembling. The questions began almost immediately. "Can you describe the email you received on Friday?" Linda nodded, trying to steady her voice. "It looked like an internal message. The company logo was there. It said something about updating security access before the system change." Robert nodded once. "And the link?" "I clicked it," she admitted. "It brought me to what looked like the login page." David typed quietly as she spoke. "Did you verify the sender address?" Robert asked. Linda hesitated. I looked at it," she said. "It seemed correct." Seemed. The word hung between them. "And after logging in?" "I received a code on my phone," Linda said. "Then I got a call. The man said there had been a problem syncing the system. He asked me to read the code back." David finally looked up. "And you did?" Linda nodded slowly. "Yes." There was no judgment in the room, but there was no forgiveness either. Robert leaned back slightly, his hands folded. "Ms. Carter," he said calmly, "you understand that authentication codes are confidential. They are not to be shared under any circumstances." Linda felt her face warm. "Yes," she said quietly. "And yet you shared it." The statement was not a question. Linda swallowed. "I thought he was IT," she said. "He sounded normal." David's fingers tapped lightly against the keyboard. "There is no record of any internal call made to your number at that time," he said. Linda's chest tightened. "I know," she said. "I understand that now." Robert nodded, but his expression did not change. From there, the conversation shifted. Less about what had happened, more about why she had not prevented it. David began projecting system logs onto the screen, dense lines of timestamps, authentication tokens, layered access permissions. He explained them in precise technical language that moved too quickly for Linda to fully follow. Multi-factor authentication chain, credential validation, privilege escalation. The words blurred together. Linda tried to focus, tried to understand, but each sentence seemed to drift further away from her. It felt like being asked to defend herself in a language she had never been taught. "And at no point did you find this process unusual?" Robert asked. Linda hesitated again. "I was confused," she admitted. "But I thought it was because I didn't understand the system well enough." David exchanged a brief glance with Robert. That moment did not go unnoticed. Linda saw it, felt it, the quiet confirmation of something unspoken. The interview continued for nearly an hour. By the end, Linda's voice had grown smaller, her answers shorter, her confidence almost gone. Every explanation she offered seemed to shrink the space she had left to stand in. When it was over, Robert closed his notebook. "Thank you, Miss Carter. We will continue reviewing the evidence." That was all. No reassurance, no conclusion, just continuation. As Linda stood to leave, she caught a glimpse of the screen still glowing behind them. Rows of data. Her name embedded somewhere within it. Reduced to entries, timestamps, proof. Or at least something that looked like it. The second interview came 2 days later. Then another. Each one similar. Each one harder. The questions repeated, but the tone shifted, subtly, gradually, until Linda began to feel less like someone explaining an incident and more like someone being measured against it. At some point, a document began circulating internally. Linda didn't see it directly, but she heard about it. A memo discussing human factors in security breaches. It didn't include names, but it didn't need to. The phrase followed her everywhere. At the grocery store, at the pharmacy, even at church. One Sunday morning, as Linda sat quietly in the third pew from the back, she noticed a familiar face. Evelyn Parker, a woman in her late 60s who had attended the same church for years. Evelyn was tall and thin, with silver hair always pinned neatly into a bun, her posture upright despite her age. She had the kind of presence that came from a lifetime of routine and quiet authority, someone who greeted others warmly but observed everything carefully. Evelyn approached her after the service. "Linda," she said gently, "I heard. There's been some trouble at work." The pause before the last word said everything. Linda managed a small nod. "It's being reviewed," she said. Evelyn studied her for a moment, not unkindly, but cautiously. "Well," she said softly, "I'm sure things will settle." Settle. Another word that sounded comforting, but felt empty. Later that day, Amy called again. This time, her tone was different, more practical, more careful. "Mom," she said, "have they mentioned any kind of settlement?" Linda frowned slightly. "Settlement?" "Like early retirement," Amy explained, "or some kind of agreement so it doesn't escalate." Linda didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," she said. "I just think," Amy continued gently, "maybe it's better to step away before it gets worse." Linda stared at the table in front of her. "Worse." The word echoed. "I've worked there 22 years, she said quietly. "I know," Amy replied, "but that doesn't always matter anymore." That was the hardest part. Not the accusation, not the investigation, but the realization that loyalty had no weight in the system now judging her. A few days later, another message arrived. This one different. Her health insurance coverage was temporarily suspended, pending employment status review. Linda read it twice, then a third time. The meaning settled slowly. Her hand moved instinctively to the small bottle of blood pressure medication on the counter. She picked it up, held it, then set it back down, carefully, as if even that decision now required caution. That night, she sat alone at her kitchen table again, her old laptop open in front of her. The login screen for the company system stared back at her. Locked, unreachable. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, without warning, she began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The kind of crying that came from something deeper than a single moment, from years, from effort, from believing that being careful was enough. Her shoulders trembled as she covered her face. "I did everything right," she whispered. But the words no longer felt certain. For the first time, the thought came clearly. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had always been exactly what they now believed her to be. Not malicious, not dishonest, just outdated. And if that was true, then maybe this wasn't just a mistake. Maybe it was inevitable. It started with something small. Linda Carter had not intended to revisit any of it that afternoon. For days, she had been trying, quietly, unsuccessfully, to keep her mind from circling back to the same moment over and over again. But when you have nothing to distract you, memory does not fade. It sharpens. She was sitting at her kitchen table, sorting through a drawer she had avoided since the suspension began. Bills, receipts, old notes, a few folded documents she had brought home without thinking. It had been a habit of hers for years. If something felt important, she kept a copy. Not because she expected trouble, but because she was afraid of forgetting. That was when she found it, the small, spiral notebook. And beneath it, slightly bent at the corner, a printed copy of the email. Linda froze for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the paper. She didn't remember printing it, but that didn't surprise her. When something confused her, she often printed it out, so she could read it more carefully, more slowly, away from the pressure of a screen. She pulled the page closer. At first, everything looked exactly the same as she remembered. The company logo, the formatting, the tone, professional, urgent, familiar. Her eyes moved slowly across the lines, reading each word as if seeing it for the first time. Then she stopped. The sender address. It was almost identical to the company domain. Almost. Linda leaned forward slightly, her breath catching just a little. There was an extra character. One small letter, something she hadn't noticed before. Something she wouldn't have noticed, not then. Her hand tightened around the edge of the paper. "How did I miss that?" she whispered. But even as the question formed, another thought followed. Would she have caught it, even if she had looked longer? Or had it been designed not to be caught? Linda sat back slowly, her mind beginning to shift. Not in panic, not yet, but in direction. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then the memory returned. Kevin. He had walked past her desk that afternoon, not rushed, not distracted. He had paused, just for a few seconds, long enough to hear what she had said, long enough to answer. "It's part of the system migration," he had told her. "Better to complete it now." At the time, it had felt like reassurance. Now, it felt like something else. Linda opened her eyes again. Her gaze returned to the email. If she had not trusted it alone, she had trusted it because someone she believed in had confirmed it. That mattered, more than she had allowed herself to admit. Her thoughts moved faster now, not chaotic, focused. There was something else, something she had almost forgotten. After she entered the code, the screen had flashed. Red. Just for a second. An error message she hadn't fully read. And then, the phone call. "Don't hang up," the voice had said. "The system is syncing." At the time, it had made sense. Now it didn't. Linda's chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. She didn't understand what it meant, but she understood enough to know. It wasn't random. She sat there for a long time, the paper still in her hands. There was no one she could bring this to. Not HR, not IT, not anymore. To them, she was already the answer, not the question. Linda looked down at the email again, then at her notebook, then back at the email. And slowly, reluctantly, she made a decision. There was one person, someone who had once worked inside the system, someone who had understood it, and left. Mark Ellis. The name came back to her with surprising clarity. Mark had worked in IT until about a year ago. He had not been loud or particularly social, but he had been attentive. The kind of man who noticed things others ignored. In his mid-40s, Mark had a slightly unkempt appearance, dark blonde hair that never quite stayed in place, light stubble along his jaw, and a habit of wearing rolled-up sleeves even in formal settings. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, always scanning, always thinking. He had a reputation for being difficult, though not in the way people usually meant. He asked questions that slowed things down. He challenged decisions that others accepted. That had not gone well for him. Linda remembered the whispers when he left, something about disagreements, about process changes, about Kevin. She had never known the details, but she remembered how suddenly it had happened. Linda hesitated for a long moment before reaching for her phone. She still had his number, saved under a name she had never expected to use again. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she pressed call. It rang longer than she expected. Once, twice, 3 times. Just as she was about to hang up. "Hello?" His voice was deeper than she remembered, calmer, cautious. "Mark?" Linda said. "It's Linda Carter, from Wexler." There was a pause, not long, but enough. "I remember," he said. Linda exhaled quietly. "I'm sorry to call like this," she said. I needed someone to look at something." Another pause. "What kind of something?" Mark asked. Linda glanced at the paper in front of her. "An email," she said, "from the system update, the one that caused everything." Silence again, longer this time. "I don't work there anymore, Linda," Mark said finally. "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not asking you to get involved, just to look. Tell me if I'm missing something." There was something in her voice now, not desperation, not exactly, but something close. Mark seemed to hear it. "Send it," he said. Linda didn't realize she had been holding her breath until she let it go. She took a photo of the printed email and sent it. Then she waited. The minutes stretched longer than they should have. When her phone rang again, she answered immediately. "You still there?" Mark asked. "Yes." His tone had changed, sharper now. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was sent to my company email," Linda said. "That's the one I clicked." Another pause, shorter this time. "No," Mark said. "I mean this format." Linda frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Mark exhaled. "This isn't a generic phishing email," he said. "This is tailored. Whoever built this knew your internal system structure. The wording, the layout, even the migration terminology, it's too precise. Linda's grip on the phone tightened. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means this didn't come from some random scammer," Mark said. "This came from someone who understands how your company works." The words landed slowly, but when they did, they settled deep. Linda didn't speak. She didn't need to. For the first time since the investigation began, something inside her shifted. Not doubt, not fear, something else. Mark continued, quieter now. "I'm not saying it's internal," he added, "but I'm saying it's not simple." Linda nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "That's enough," she said. And it was, because for the first time, the story made a different kind of sense. She was not just someone who had failed. She was someone who had been placed in the path of failure. Linda lowered the phone slowly. Her eyes moved to the notebook on the table, then back to the email, then to nothing at all. She sat very still, breathing, thinking, understanding. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know she had not imagined it. Enough to know she had not simply fallen. She had been led. And when a person realizes they were chosen to fall, something changes. The fear doesn't disappear, but it transforms into something sharper, something quieter, something that waits for the right moment to stand again. The shift from doubt to clarity did not happen all at once. It came in pieces, small, quiet realizations that when placed together formed something Linda Carter could no longer ignore. Mark called her again the next morning. His tone was different this time, less cautious, more focused. "I looked deeper," he said without greeting. "This wasn't just about you." Linda sat down slowly at the kitchen table, her hand instinctively resting on the spiral notebook beside her. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean," Mark continued, "the email you received. It wasn't sent widely. It wasn't random. It went to a very specific group of employees." Linda frowned slightly. "What kind of group?" There was a brief pause on the line. "The kind that has access," Mark said, "but not confidence." The words settled heavily. Linda didn't respond. She didn't need to. Mark continued. "I checked what I could based on what you sent me. The formatting, the targeting pattern, it lines up with employees who have mid-level access to internal documents, contracts, pricing, vendor data. Not high enough to trigger constant oversight, but enough to open doors." Linda's grip on the table tightened slightly. "And most of them," Mark added, "are older." That part hurt, not because it was wrong, but because it was precise. Linda looked down at her hands. "They chose people like me," she said quietly. "They chose people who wouldn't question it fast enough," Mark replied. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just understood. "There's more," Mark said. Linda lifted her head slightly. "What?" "The timing." Mark's voice sharpened. "I ran a rough comparison. Based on what you told me, within minutes of you entering that authentication code, there was a large data request triggered from your account." Linda felt her chest tighten again. "That's what they said in the meeting," she whispered. "No," Mark corrected gently. "They said your account accessed the data. That's not the same as you doing it." Linda didn't speak. "Listen carefully," Mark continued. "The request wasn't something you would normally do. It came from a permission branch that sits above your usual access level." Linda blinked. "I don't have that kind of access," she said. "I know," Mark replied. The simplicity of his answer made everything heavier. "That means," he continued, "whoever used your account didn't just log in. They escalated privileges inside the session." Linda felt a slow, cold realization settle in. "They were already inside the system," she said. "Or they knew exactly how to move through it," Mark replied. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Linda's mind was no longer scattered. It was aligning, piece by piece. "I need to tell them," she said suddenly. Mark paused. "Tell who?" "The legal team, HR, someone," Linda said. "This changes things." Another pause, longer this time. "Linda," Mark said carefully, "you can try, but understand something first." "What?" "They're not looking for complexity," he said. "They're looking for resolution." The words felt familiar and dangerous. Still, Linda nodded to herself. "I have to try." She ended the call shortly after. The decision felt fragile, but necessary. Later that afternoon, Linda found herself back inside the same building once again. The same polished floors, the same quiet efficiency. But this time, something was different. She wasn't just walking in as someone being questioned. She was walking in with something to say. Inside the legal office, the atmosphere felt colder than she remembered. Not physically, but in tone. Kevin was already there, sitting at the table, waiting. Linda stopped for half a second when she saw him. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, just as smoothly as ever, he offered a small, controlled smile. "Linda," he said, "I didn't expect you today." His voice was calm, measured, almost concerned. It made Linda feel off balance before she had even spoken. I needed to share something," she said. Kevin nodded slightly, leaning back in his chair. Of course. There were others in the room, 2 members of the legal team, but Linda barely noticed them. Her focus stayed on Kevin. She explained everything: the email, the domain detail, Mark's observations, the targeted group, the privilege escalation. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. For the first time in days, she felt like she was speaking from something real. When she finished, the room fell quiet. Kevin was the first to respond. He didn't interrupt, he didn't argue. He simply exhaled softly, folding his hands on the table. "Linda," he said gently, "I understand how overwhelming this must feel." The tone was soft, sympathetic, and completely disarming. Linda felt her confidence falter slightly. "But what you're describing," Kevin continued, "relies on assumptions." Linda opened her mouth, but he continued before she could speak. "External phishing attacks have become more sophisticated," he said. "It's not unusual for them to mimic internal structures." He glanced briefly toward the legal team. "And when people are under stress," he added carefully, "it's natural to try to find patterns that make things feel less random." Linda felt something twist in her chest. "I'm not guessing," she said. "This is based on what someone outside the company told you?" Kevin asked calmly. The words landed cleanly, precisely. Linda hesitated. That was all it took. Kevin leaned forward slightly. "I don't doubt that you're trying to make sense of this," he said, "but we also have to consider your history with the system." Linda froze. "My history?" Kevin nodded gently. "There have been instances during training sessions where you've struggled with security protocols," he said, "forgetting steps, asking for assistance." Each word was accurate, and that made them impossible to fight. "I was learning," Linda said quietly. "I know," Kevin replied. "And somehow, that made it worse." The room had shifted again, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that Linda felt it. Her explanation was no longer evidence. It was interpretation, emotion, something less reliable. Kevin didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her. He simply reframed everything. And in doing so, he made her sound uncertain. After the meeting, Linda walked out slowly, her steps heavier than before. But something stopped her just outside the building. "Linda." She turned. Jenna stood a few feet away. Jenna Miller was in her late 20s, slim, with long, straight brown hair and a nervous energy that seemed to live just beneath her skin. Her eyes darted slightly as she spoke, as if she was always aware of who might be watching. I wanted to say something," Jenna said quietly. Linda waited. Jenna glanced around before stepping closer. "I got that email too," she whispered. Linda's breath caught. "What?" Jenna nodded quickly. "I didn't click it," she said. "It looked off to me, so I deleted it." Linda stared at her. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jenna hesitated, then looked away. "Because I don't want to be involved," she said. "I can't afford to lose this job." The honesty was immediate and painful. Please don't mention me, Jenna added quickly. I just thought you should know. Linda nodded slowly. I understand. And she did, more than she wished she did. As Jenna walked away, Linda remained where she was, still, quiet, seeing something clearly now that she hadn't before. This wasn't just about truth, it was about fear, and fear was working exactly as intended. That night, Linda sat in front of her mirror. For a long time, she simply looked, at the lines in her face, at the exhaustion in her eyes, at the woman she had become in just a few weeks. She saw everything they saw: age, uncertainty, weakness, and for a moment, she almost agreed with them. Maybe it would be easier to accept it, to step away quietly, to hold on to what little dignity remained. The thought settled in, clear, tempting. Then her gaze shifted to the table behind her, the notebook, still open, pages filled with careful, deliberate handwriting. Proof, not of failure, but of effort, of persistence, of someone who had refused to give up, even when everything became harder. Linda turned back to the mirror. Her expression changed. Not completely, but enough. They want me to disappear, she said softly. The words felt different when spoken out loud, more real, more final, but also more wrong. Because for the first time, Linda understood something clearly. This wasn't just about losing her job, it was about losing her place, her right to exist in a world that had decided she no longer fit. And that was something she could not accept. Linda stood slowly, her hands steady now. If I fall, she whispered, it won't be quietly. The room remained still, but something inside her had shifted completely. Not into confidence, not yet, but into something stronger, resolve. The shift this time was not internal, it was external, and it came from someone who was no longer able to stay silent. It was early evening when Linda's phone rang again, but this time the number was unfamiliar. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone, as if bracing for another blow. Linda, it's me. Jenna, but her voice sounded different, tighter, unsteady. What happened? Linda asked immediately. I think I heard something, Jenna said, her words rushed, uneven. I wasn't trying to listen, I swear, I was near the conference room and Kevin was inside on a call. Linda straightened in her chair. What kind of call? Jenna hesitated, then lowered her voice instinctively. He was arguing, she said, with someone. Not like before, this was different. He said something about the path already being cleared and that the data still hadn't been moved. Linda felt something cold settle in her chest. Are you sure? She asked quietly. I know how it sounds, Jenna replied quickly. I didn't record anything. I didn't even stay long. But the way he said it, it didn't sound like work. It sounded like he was worried. Linda closed her eyes for a moment. This wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing. Did he mention who he was talking to? Linda asked. No, Jenna said, but I heard him say the vendor at one point. That word stayed. After the call ended, Linda sat in silence for a long time, replaying every word Jenna had said. Then she called Mark. He answered on the second ring. I think we have something, Linda said. Mark didn't interrupt, he just listened, carefully. When she finished, there was a long pause. It's still not evidence, he said finally. I know, Linda replied, but it fits. Mark exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said, it does. There was a shift in his tone again, not cautious anymore, decisive. I might know someone, he added. Still inside, compliance. Linda frowned slightly. Will they help? Mark didn't answer immediately. They won't do it for you, he said, but they might do it for the system. That was enough. The next day, Mark made the call. The person he reached out to was Daniel Reeves, a senior compliance analyst in his early 50s. Daniel had a lean, angular face with sharp cheekbones and a permanent crease between his brows, the kind formed by years of skepticism rather than age alone. His hair, once dark, had thinned unevenly and now carried streaks of gray, and he wore simple rectangular glasses that gave him a perpetually analytical look. Daniel was known inside the company as someone who did not easily trust surface explanations. Years earlier, he had pushed back against several rushed implementations during previous system updates, which had quietly cost him a promotion. Since then, he had become more careful, but not less observant. Mark explained just enough, not everything, but enough. Daniel didn't agree immediately. He asked questions, specific ones. Then he asked for time. When he called back later that night, his tone had changed. "Something's off," he said. Mark leaned forward in his chair. "What did you find?" "There were temporary access permissions granted about 2 months ago," Daniel said. "External vendor support. Approved under Kevin's authority." Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. "Temporary?" "That's how it was labeled," Daniel replied. "But it was never fully revoked, not according to standard procedure." Linda, listening on speaker, felt her breath slow. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means someone outside the company had extended access longer than they should have," Daniel said. "Long enough to understand the system, long enough to move inside it." Mark nodded slowly. "Anything else?" Daniel hesitated, then continued. "There was a meeting," he said, "internal, about digital transition risk." Linda's chest tightened. "What kind of risk?" "User vulnerability," Daniel replied. "Kevin presented a list of employees who might require additional support during system migration." The room went quiet. Linda didn't need to ask. She already knew. "He used that list," Mark said quietly. Daniel didn't confirm it directly, but he didn't deny it either. "The timeline lines up," he said, and that was enough. For the first time, the pieces didn't just suggest something. They pointed, clearly, deliberately. Mark leaned back, his jaw tightening. "This isn't negligence," he said. "No," Daniel agreed. "It isn't." Linda sat very still. She didn't feel vindicated, not yet. What she felt was something heavier, something harder to carry. Truth. The next step came faster than any of them expected. Daniel didn't go through Kevin. He went above him, to an independent board liaison, someone with authority to reopen internal investigations when governance risks were involved. The effect was immediate. Within 48 hours, the case changed. Quietly, but completely. Linda received a formal request to attend a final review session. This time, the tone of the message was different, less accusatory, more procedural. When she walked into the room again, the arrangement had changed. Kevin was still there, but he wasn't at the center anymore. Linda noticed it immediately. He looked the same suit, same posture, same controlled expression. But something had shifted, subtly, almost invisibly. When the session began, Kevin spoke first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lose composure. "Linda Carter has been working with a former employee to construct a narrative that deflects responsibility," he said evenly. "There is no verified evidence linking internal leadership to this breach." It was clean, direct, and practiced. But this time, it didn't land the same way. Because this time, it wasn't the only version of the story in the room. Daniel spoke next, calm, precise. He laid out the access logs, the vendor permissions, the missing revocation steps, the timing alignment. He didn't accuse, he presented. That made it stronger. Then came something unexpected. Another name, Harold Bennett, a warehouse employee in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a weathered face and short graying hair, the kind of man who had spent more time lifting crates than sitting at a desk. His voice, when he spoke, carried the steady tone of someone used to practical decisions rather than technical ones. "I got that email too," Harold said. Linda turned slightly toward him. "I almost did it," he added. "Clicked everything. But my son told me to call him first before putting in any code." The room shifted again, subtly, but undeniably. Because now, Linda was not alone. The pattern had a second point, and that made it real. Kevin didn't react visibly, but Linda saw it, in the stillness, in the pause that came just a fraction too late. Then it was her turn. For weeks, Linda had been interrupted, corrected, dismissed. But now, no one spoke over her. She stepped forward slowly, her hands steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply placed the items on the table. The notebook, the printed email, the timeline of the call, Jenna's statement. Each one carefully aligned, not as defense, but as truth. Linda looked around the room, at the same faces that had once avoided her, at the same silence that had once condemned her. And she spoke, not loudly, but clearly. "I didn't understand everything," she said, "but I knew something was wrong." No one interrupted. "I trusted what I was told," she continued, "because that's what I've done here for over 20 years. Her voice didn't break. "Not this time." "But that doesn't make me the cause," she said. The room remained still, listening for the first time. Linda stepped back, not in defeat, but in completion. Kevin said nothing, not immediately, and that silence said more than anything else. Because for the first time, the system that had chosen its victim was being seen. Kevin Brooks did not raise his voice when they told him. He didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He simply sat there, hands folded neatly on the table, his posture unchanged, as if the outcome had always been one of several calculated possibilities. But something had shifted, not in his words, in his stillness. The decision came quickly after that final review. Suspension first, then termination. Official language followed, phrases like failure of oversight, violation of security protocol, and conflict of interest with external vendors. But beneath those words was something far more deliberate, far more unsettling. Kevin had not simply made a mistake. He had chosen who to trust, chosen who to expose, chosen who would carry the consequences. The investigation uncovered more than anyone had expected: financial ties, subtle at first glance, consulting fees routed through intermediary firms, payments disguised under layered service agreements, connections that only made sense when viewed from the right angle. Kevin had approved extended access for an external vendor under the justification of accelerating fraud detection systems. But the permissions had remained open long enough to allow something else entirely to happen. Something profitable, something quiet, and something that required a perfect kind of cover. People like Linda Carter. The official statement did not include all of that. It didn't need to. By then, the damage had already begun to surface in quieter ways. Closed-door meetings, urgent policy revisions, a sudden emphasis on accountability that hadn't existed weeks before. Linda received the letter 3 days later. It arrived in a plain envelope. No ceremony, no announcement, just a formal apology. The company acknowledged that she had been wrongfully implicated, that her actions had been manipulated under deceptive conditions, that her position and benefits would be fully restored. The words were careful, structured, precise. Linda read them once, then again. Then she placed the letter on the table and stared at it for a long time. It should have felt like relief, and in some ways it did. But relief was not the same as repair. The night she had spent awake, staring at the ceiling while calculating how long her savings would last. The quiet hesitation before buying medication, weighing cost against necessity. The way people had looked at her, some with suspicion, others with polite distance, as if she had become something fragile, or worse, something embarrassing. None of that was written in the letter. None of that could be undone. Over the next few days, a few people came to see her, not many, but enough. Jenna was the first. She stood awkwardly at Linda's doorway, her usual nervous energy softened into something closer to guilt. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted quietly. Linda looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "You were scared," she said. Jenna lowered her eyes. "Yeah." There was no accusation in Linda's voice, no resentment, because she understood something now that she hadn't before. Truth doesn't make people brave, it only gives them a chance to feel less ashamed later. That was all. Others followed, a brief knock, a short conversation, apologies that sounded rehearsed but not entirely empty. Linda accepted them the same way, calmly, without holding on. Because holding on would have required her to stay inside something she had already outgrown. The day she returned to the company building, Amy was there, waiting. She stood near the parking lot, her arms folded tightly at first, as if unsure how to hold herself in that moment. Amy Carter, in her early 30s, had inherited her mother's soft features, but carried herself with a sharper edge shaped by a different generation. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her posture was more guarded, more ready to react. Years of watching her mother endure quietly had given her a protective instinct she didn't always know how to express. When Linda stepped out of the car, Amy didn't say anything at first. She just walked forward and held her tightly. Linda didn't expect it, not like that. For a second, she froze. Then something inside her gave way, and she cried. Not the quiet tears she had shed alone in the dark, not the restrained ones she had swallowed in front of strangers. This time, it was different. It was release. It was the weight of being seen. "I'm sorry," Amy whispered. "I should have been there more." Linda shook her head gently. "You're here now," she said, and that was enough. Inside the building, everything looked the same. The same desks, the same hallways, the same people moving through their routines. But Linda did not feel the same. As she walked past the rows of cubicles, she noticed the glances. Different now. Not avoidance, not suspicion. Something else. Respect, perhaps. Or maybe discomfort. A reminder. In the company-wide meeting later that week, her name was mentioned. Not as a mistake, not as a warning, but as an example. A model employee who had contributed to uncovering a critical system vulnerability. The words were well chosen, carefully framed. But as Linda sat there listening, she realized something quietly important. They were telling a story, a better one, but still a story. Because the truth was simpler than that. She had survived. That was all. She had not exposed a system because she was exceptional. She had done it because she had refused to disappear. And that difference mattered. After the meeting, Kevin's name was never mentioned again, not publicly, not directly. He became something else, a lesson, an absence, a quiet warning embedded in new policies and updated protocols. Linda didn't think about him much, not anymore, because in the end, Kevin had not taken everything from her. He had tried to take something deeper than a job. He had tried to take her place, her right to belong, her right to exist in a world that had started to move faster than she could follow. And that was what she had fought for. Not the desk, not the title, not even the apology. That night, Linda sat once more at her kitchen table, the same table where everything had begun. The notebook was still there, open, the pages filled with careful handwriting. She ran her fingers lightly over them, each line a record of effort, of persistence, of someone who had refused to give up even when the world around her had quietly decided she no longer fit. Linda leaned back slowly, her eyes moving across the room. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. She thought about the offer to return, the position, the restored benefits, the familiar path waiting for her to step back into it. For a moment, she considered it. Then she shook her head, because she understood something now. Justice was not sitting back down in the same chair. It was knowing she didn't need that chair to prove her worth. Linda stood up, walked to the window, and looked out into the quiet night. She wasn't stronger, not in the way people usually meant. She wasn't faster, or sharper, or more fluent in the language of systems and code. But she had done something far more difficult. She had refused to let humiliation silence her. And in doing so, she had taken back the only thing that had ever truly mattered: her dignity. Linda Carter did not return to her old desk, not because she wasn't allowed to, but because she no longer needed to. The offer had been generous, more than generous in fact. A salary increase, extended benefits, and what the company described as special support for the remainder of her years before retirement. It was, by every practical measure, a second chance. But Linda understood something now that she hadn't before. A second chance doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means choosing not to. The first few weeks after everything settled were quieter than she expected. Not empty, but unfamiliar. For the first time in decades, her mornings were not structured by schedules, deadlines, or the quiet urgency of being needed somewhere. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. Then, slowly, it began to feel like space, time to rest, time to breathe, time to notice things she had not allowed herself to notice before. Her health, for one. The fatigue she had ignored for years now settled fully into her body, demanding attention in a way she could no longer push aside. There were days when she simply sat by the window, letting the light move slowly across the room, measuring time not by tasks, but by stillness. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel guilty about it. It was Amy who first suggested the idea. "You don't have to go back," she said one afternoon, sitting across from her mother at the same kitchen table where so much had changed. "But that doesn't mean you have to stop either." Linda looked at her. "What would I do?" she asked, not dismissively, but honestly. Amy hesitated for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Help people like you," she said. The words stayed. At first, Linda found the idea almost ironic, even absurd. She, who had been deceived by a simple email, guiding others through the dangers of technology? It didn't make sense, and yet, that was exactly why it did. The opportunity came quietly. A small community organization in their area had begun offering workshops on digital safety for middle-aged and older adults. People who, like Linda, found themselves navigating systems that moved faster than they could comfortably follow. They needed someone who could connect. Not just explain, but understand. Linda wasn't sure she could, but she agreed to try. The first session was held in a local library. Nothing formal, just a small room with folding chairs, a projector that flickered slightly, and a group of people who looked familiar. Not in identity, but in expression. Uncertainty, hesitation, a quiet fear of getting something wrong. Linda stood at the front of the room, holding her small spiral notebook. The same one. For a moment, she felt it again. That old feeling. The one that told her she didn't belong there, that she wasn't qualified, that someone else, someone faster, sharper, more fluent, should be standing where she was. She took a breath. Then she began. "I'm not an expert," she said. The honesty settled the room immediately. "But I've made mistakes," she continued, "and I've learned from them." That was all it took. She didn't use technical language. She didn't explain systems in complicated ways. Instead, she spoke about moments, about hesitation, about pressure, about the quiet ways people are pushed into decisions they don't fully understand. "Don't be ashamed to ask again," she said gently. "If something feels rushed, it's probably not for your benefit." The room listened. Not because she was authoritative, but because she was real. Word spread slowly at first, then more quickly. From the library to a community center. From a community center to a small business group looking for a better way to support their older employees during digital transitions. Linda found herself standing in front of different rooms, different faces, but the same expressions. And each time, she brought the same thing with her. Not expertise, but experience. Amy attended one of the sessions quietly, sitting near the back, watching. Her mother stood at the front, still holding the notebook. But it looked different now, not like a sign of limitation, but of continuity, of someone who had learned, slowly and carefully, in a world that rarely made space for that pace. There was a moment, during one session, when a woman raised her hand. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her hands slightly trembling as she spoke. "I feel like I'm always behind," she admitted. "Like everyone else understands things I don't." Linda stepped closer, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough. "I felt that way too," she said. The woman nodded, eyes lowering slightly. Linda paused, then added, more quietly, "Sometimes the problem isn't that we're behind. It's that no one took the time to walk with us." The room softened. Something shifted. Not in understanding, but in relief. Linda didn't become a technology expert. She didn't build a business. She didn't suddenly transform into someone the world would call impressive. But she became something else, something quieter, and perhaps more important. She became someone who stayed, who didn't turn away from the places where people felt small, who didn't rush past those who needed time, who understood that dignity is not something given by systems, but something preserved by refusing to disappear. One autumn afternoon, after finishing a session with a group of women who had recently lost confidence in their work due to digital changes, Linda lingered outside the library. The air was cool, the light soft. The reflection in the glass door caught her attention. For a moment, she almost looked away. Old habits, old reflexes. But then, she didn't. She stood there, still, looking, at the same woman she had avoided for so long. The same lines, the same age, the same quiet presence. But something was different. Not her face, her posture, her gaze. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She wasn't apologizing for being there. Linda smiled. Not widely, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to recognize herself. And in that small, quiet moment, she understood something clearly. A happy ending isn't about returning to who you were before everything broke. It's about becoming someone who no longer feels broken by it. Linda turned away from the glass, walked down the steps, and continued forward. Not into the life she had lost, but into the one she had finally allowed herself to live.
Linda's story isn't about defeating someone else. It's about not losing yourself when the world is ready to move on without you. She didn't become faster, sharper, or more fluent in technology, but she did something far more meaningful. She stood her ground against shame, faced isolation, and chose not to disappear. What looked like a single mistake that could have ended everything became the beginning of something new. Through her journey, Linda reminds us that moving slower does not mean being less valuable, and being deceived does not mean being undeserving of dignity. Life may not always be fair, but a person's worth is never defined by one moment of weakness. And if you're watching this, maybe it's not by accident. Sometimes God allows us to walk through difficult seasons, not to break us, but to guide us toward a path we never imagined. If this story spoke to your heart, share your thoughts in the comments, send this video to someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe for more healing stories. May God bless you with peace, strength, and quiet courage in your everyday life.